Hi, this is David Gornoski, host of A Neighbor's Choice and Things Hidden podcast, as well as some of our other programs like Science and You with our chief science advisor, Dr. Yu, and our seed oil survival series that we continue to have great fun unpacking the truth of nutrition. I wanted to give you a quick little message saying we appreciate all the support that we get from our uh, monthly contributors and our one-time donation supporters. And we'd encourage all of you to go to our website, a neighborschoice.com, click on contribute, and make a monthly pledge today, whether it's $1, $5, 15, 20, 50, whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter. Just be a part of building this new media project that we've developed to empower and inform, to inspire, to kickstart a scientific renaissance, an anthropological breakthrough and reformation in the church. All these things are possible with your support right now. So make that commitment today and help us keep doing the productions that we have. Thank you. Today we have a special return guest on our Things Hidden podcast. That's where we examine current events in light of the kind of biblical anthropology reading that we emphasize on this program. And we have Father Turbo Qualls. He's the rector of St. Mary of Egypt, Serbian Orthodox Church in Kansas City, Missouri. And he's also one of the hosts of the Royal Path podcast. How you doing, sir?
Doing great, David. Great to be here. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Father Turbo, I always enjoy, your reflections and your perspective, and you're very careful in the way you parse out current events from a Christian worldview, and I appreciate that. So I thought I'd like to have you on as we kind of near the end of this year and head into 2024 to look at the big picture, where we are over this last year, the vibe, so to speak, to get a temperature check of where we're at. So, what comes to mind for you? We're in Advent season, and people have different calendars to celebrate this, but regardless, it's still a time where people are thinking about Advent. They're thinking about incarnational, ideas and what that means in history, and then they're looking around at current events and they're saying, "What time is it?" So, what time is it?
I think the first thing is it's well, my first response is it's later than you think. I think that's I think that's really evident by a few things. Primarily, maybe I think the one that's most worthy of being noted on is um, in the light of just the awareness of how difficult things are on a domestic level, economically, in regards of international affairs. No one unless the person is completely, cut off from all media, no one thinks that there's even, a ray of hope or peace anywhere.
Yeah.
And yet there really isn't the level of I think people are anxious. I think people are worried behind closed doors. But what I get is still a kind of general sense of, well, I can still I still got the phone. I can still view my screen, whatever that is. I can still get food, what I mean by food, I mean, the kind of, bread and circuses type of thing,
Taco
essentially.
Bell. Yeah.
The bread and circuses are still running.
Yeah.
And so since the bread and circuses are still running, um, that's what makes me think, man, um, I think people are really aware, but they're just, to some sense, and this is maybe what's even scary, is that there's a measure of despair that's starting to kind of despair laden apathy, maybe, that's creeping in, where people are like, what are you going to do? you know, and people beginning to even perhaps wake up to certain things. I was listening to your conversation with Shane, and I think that's a great insight. My co-host then Cyprian had talked about that before too, about like the dim age and people coming into superstition, and I think that's a real thing. I think that people are really wanting to grasp onto something, and with it being Christmas season, and people are distracted right now. Um, but I think that the distraction is fairly thin. So I gotta be honest with you. I'd like to look at some data. Not that you trust the data per se, but I'm curious about the economics behind shopping this year. You know what I mean? I think that would be a great indicator on things, because I know people tend to really lose themselves. That distraction, kind of filling that void and quelling the anxieties by shopping and buying things, and even if it's clicking on Amazon, that's a real thing for people. But my sense is that people are just feeling kind of hopeless, and I'm just going to keep going on and doing what I'm doing until I can't, because it seems like no matter what's thrown at people, there's a sense that what are you going to do,
Yeah. So when you look at that environment, how does that affect your local activities as a rector of your congregation?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because one of the things I was going to say, which I kind of held back on saying it, is because I acknowledge I'm on an island, and so my community is such that we kind of collectively are aware of it, and to some degree, it kind of provides a measure of us being able to thrive. And so for us locally, this is a wonderful time, because the vapidness of society, and the vapidness of the approach to the season, not understanding what it's really there for, actually is very helpful for us to, as you'd say, maybe dig in a little bit deeper. So for us, it's it it, it it's an even greater kind of nudge to the deeper things, um, being together, prayer, community, fellowship, all the things that really facilitate a Eucharistic community. So I think that's one of the reasons why I look at maybe someone outside of the church, and I gauge a lot of that by maybe some of the media outlets that I'll kind of, keep my eye on every once in a while, and kind of see what they're talking about, and um, again, forgive me for referencing the conversation you had, but things, the fact that people are becoming aware of how absurd things are, I think that's an indicator of something,
Yeah.
but people are becoming aware of it, but they're not doing anything about it,
Right.
So
Do you get the sense that we're at a tipping point here in our culture, or is it an American tipping point, or is it a global tipping point because of the globalist, influence America has on the world's culture?
it's a real tough one to say. I mean, I just came back from Serbia, and when I was there, I have to say that it was a very hopeful pilgrimage for me, because to see, a country, to see a nation, in spite of the difficulties, maybe, or perhaps because of the difficulties that they encounter, the very real difficulties that they have, um, they, the people that I always ran into, tend to have their mind on the right thing. They tend to be grounded.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know about a global tipping point. And I think you're familiar enough with me where I always get the sense that it's not, if there is a tipping point, it's not the tipping point people think it is.
Yeah.
Um, because again, for me, the thing I'm waiting for is the kind of tipping point to the era of the right. That's the thing that I keep seeing is,
Yeah.
gaining steam. So is it an American tipping point? Are we at a one? You know, I don't think we're quite there yet, but I think that um, everything can turn in a flash overnight, just like just like 9/11, right?
Yeah.
All it takes is a catalyst, a sharp catalyst, and then all of this kindling that's been, kind of stacking up, and then whoosh, just um, coming from California and experiencing wildfires my whole life, one of the things that you don't know about fire unless you've seen it is how quickly it can move. Like it can be shocking how quick a fire can move through something, a structure or something like that. Um, so maybe in that sense, it's like you don't even recognize that you're just looking at a pile of kindling, but then something catalyst happens and then oof, you have a huge fire. So I think maybe that's the way to look at it right now is it doesn't seem like it. It seems like because I was talking about this with someone, maybe it was you and I the other day, but it seems as like why are things being seemingly delayed? And they keep pushing back this economic crisis, which you know I'm no by no means a number guy, but looking at it and from my context, it's like it's incredible how this Ponzi scheme, how this house of cards is still
Yeah.
standing, right? Um, and I don't know how they keep doing it, but they just keep kicking the can down the road with a lot of things. So I think all that feeds into a real malaise for people spiritually. So
Yeah. You remind me of that passage from Luke, chapter 12, verse 49. I have come to set the world on fire and I wish it were already
mm,
burning, you know?
that's good. Yeah, yeah, that's good. That's good.
Um, yeah, it's um, when I look at kind of where people are at, you said if you're in the media matrix, you're going to feel how negative it is. But when you pull out of it, it seems kind of okay, except for if you're in certain places where crime and
Mhm.
economic despair has settled in more over time. But uh, it reminds me of how Satan is the prince of the air, and this
Mhm.
idea of like the media networks are kind of like his domain to harvest that kind of outcome, which is
Mhm.
despair and hopelessness and apathy. And
Yeah.
that seems to be the biggest religion of. I was mentioning, you mentioned that conversation I had with Shane, and I was talking about this kind of arc of millennial belief that people had, as a child. It was like everything was enchanted as a child. And I just had my generational arc. I don't know what other people's was like, but it was like everybody believed, TV was saying, aliens were around the corner, they were going to abduct people. And you'd always have the heavy set person in the country who said that an alien came and visited them and got into their mind and they were frozen. And the little thing had big almond eyes, and they'd show that little drawing right on
Yeah.
hard copy. And you're a little kid and you're like, oh, whoa,
Yeah.
it felt alive because you'd go to Sunday and hear about angels and demons, and you'd hear about Revelation because 90s was really big about the end of
Mhm.
the world is coming with 2000 and everything. And it felt apocalyptic was on the horizon, and you're hearing about these beasts coming out of the belly of the earth. You're hearing about these little nondescript almond-eyed creatures getting into your head and taking you up to do bizarre experiments. you know and and then you've got other stuff that people were taught when they're a kid. You got Santa, then you're taught the Bible, and you're taught creation, and you're taught Jesus, and all these things, and then they kind of trickle out in the 2000s. That's the age of the new atheist. That's the age of rationalism. That's the age of neo-Darwinism's going to contend with intelligent design and make sure that that little circus joke of a scientific theory has no place ever in any
Mhm.
setting and educational discourse in the American empire, period. And there was this thing, and it kind of broke. It looked like the rationalists won, and then we go back into this return to belief in the spiritual world and something else. But as I say, it seems like now we're at a point where the belief in the afterlife is now kind of hot and it kind of becoming ascendant, but belief in the future of the earth is on the downplay. So it's like we're starting to recapture, well, yeah, maybe there is something to there being something after this physical body perishes. but we're almost losing our faith in the belief that the physical material earth matters and it has a future to invest in, you know? So
well,
I
I
think
think,
that's interesting, right?
yeah, I mean, I think part of the thing too is like we're in the middle of that slow boiling pot. We're not being put in it and we're not leaping. It's like we're in the midst of it. So
Mhm.
for instance, you have definitely in my lifetime, I never thought I'd see the day that I could talk with kind of like a quote unquote normal normie or whatever, just like the average, Joe about, you know, things that you might see on, for me, it was Coast to Coast with Art Bell, now it's like, that's no one knows what that is, but Alex Jones is kind of ascended. Even the fact that Alex Jones is ascended into the popular lexicon, that tells you something,
Yeah.
right? The fact that you can have a conversation with someone and the amount of people who concede that it's a rational thought to believe in extraterrestrials
Yeah.
or to right, that tells you something. That tells you, because the world is more enchanted now, and I think the world is more imbued with that now than it was when you and I were younger, because it isn't just about because you were younger, right? It's about the fact that now this is the kind of the broader logisme that people are imbibing, right? The broader assaultive thought that is come and captivating and really to some degree enslaving people, right? These ideas and concepts, they bring their own sense of anxiety, their own sense of confusion, and that in of itself begins to work at the inner processes of communities, not just individuals, but communities. And that's what eventually allows them to now begin to acquiesce to certain concepts, ideas that they would have never considered, right? Um, that in of itself is telling. And I think that's the thing that we have to really kind of think about as the year closes out is the absurdity of everything, the kind of plaster doll, Play-Doh aliens they found in Mexico, you know, um,
Yeah.
all the way to all of the theater with the former president. All of these things are pointing us and priming us to reject something, but not just reject something for the sake of rejection, but to prime us, I think, to accept something that is just going to thread the needle so perfectly.
Right. Um, I look at the the Song of Mary and Luke, and it says, you know, it's
Actually,
very
one thing that, forgive me, David, I just want to throw one thing out, just because I don't want to lose this. I think it's important.
yeah.
I think the thing, though, is what's still lacking is sobriety, because people, um, it's kind of something I've picked up recently watching after, near death experience, afterlife kind of
Oh,
shows.
did you see that documentary that just came out in theaters about that afterlife or
No, I
after
haven't.
death?
Mm-mm,
Something like
mm-mm,
that.
mm-mm. But I've been kind of like skimming the YouTube. I've been doing it for a reason. And I've been kind of like going through, and part of what I'm trying to see is some of the thread um with this kind of new crop of experiences. And the thing that I see real consistently is there's a lack of sobriety, right? So people are really, really wanting and being willing to give themselves over to a perception, an experience, or even like an idea in regards of like ETs, right? Fairies, whatever it's going to be. But there's a lack of sobriety, a lack of really, okay, if this exists, what do I do about it?
Right, right.
And that's what I mean by sobriety.
Sure.
Um, okay, I've seen there's all these people saying they've seen this, they've seen that. Well, what am I doing about it? And it just, even the medium is the message, right? So the fact that we're taking all of this in,
Yeah.
spoon-fed through the screen, that's what facilitates a lack of sobriety. Listen, there's something that happens when you read. There's a real investment and there's a real work, especially if you spend a lot of time on the screen and then you still read. It's like you can feel the difference. You can feel like, oh, you can
Yeah.
feel the work that comes from that. And I
Yeah,
think
for sure.
the medium is the message. I think that that's part of the loss of sobriety, because you present people information, you present them the potential and the
Yeah.
seduction of fantasy. And the fathers in our tradition talk a lot about the danger of fantasy. And so people are dealing with fantasy in mass. And so that
Yeah.
lends itself to a lack of sobriety, whereas simple tasks like traditional tasks of reading, tactile, um, reading, and even like, forgive me, even digital reading is a measure of effort, right? But just reading, we won't even get into the tactile aspect, reading, um, the discipline of keeping prayer,
Yeah.
right? All the things that are kind of quote unquote boring, right? All those things facilitate a sobriety, which is what's needed to kind of discern these things. Because part of the problem I'm having from what you're asking, it's not you, the problem is me. It's just I see it all as absurd. Right. So it's like how much it's just saying like, well, the whole thing is fallen. The whole thing is really absurd. And getting to what you're saying about, the planet Earth, like that of itself is something that I find really interesting, that this, narrative surrounding the viability of life on Earth. And, it's like these fundamental things. First, it was, you know, not first in order, but just,
Yeah.
gender, like real basic things like male and female, like the basic
Yeah.
foundations and stakes
Yeah.
that pin down and form reality. It's like that the concerted effort to undermine the
Yeah.
most fundamental of understandings.
I think that because we have lived through such and are living through such a decadent, morally decadent, nihilistic culture, that in America at least, belief in planet Earth as a vocation of the Christian is so passe right now, because people are just trying to get by with getting over the hangover of the decadence and nihilism of their own personal participation
Mm.
in the hedonism of our culture, and it's all of its soul sucking attributes, that it's like they don't have time. It's like, the age of the Wright brothers. This anniversary, we're going to do a special show with my physicist friend, Dr. Yu, about the anniversary of the Wright brothers and their first flight, and the age of the Wright brothers, the age of these giant leaps and aspirational technologies. I think those are all in keeping of the Dominion mandate. But Christ redeems us, he restores us, but for what purpose? Is it just to focus on the fact that we've been redeemed and that's it, or is it to be redeemed back to the Dominion mandate, to be restored back to Adam's calling? And it's almost like people are just so overwhelmed by the magnitude of and it's a good, I guess in some ways it's a good place to be. They're overwhelmed by the magnitude of their darkness and their fallenness and their obsessions with vanities and envies and wealth and perversions or whatever, that when someone like me says, hey, now that we're restored, let's go and make anti-gravity, let's go beat it, they're like, oh, come on, I'm
Mhm.
just trying to be a good boy and good girl. I'm just
Yeah.
trying to make it. I don't have
Well,
time to be thinking
I
about.
mean,
And then they automatically think you sound like Schwab. You sound like a Tower of Babel guy, and it's like that's almost like a coping mechanism to not even think about the
well,
call to dominion.
here's part of the problem, especially with those of us who have a traditional worldview in regards of um, eschatology, and things like that, is it's much safer and easier to just kind of take the route of kind of imminent destruction.
Yeah.
It's much safer and easier. And I'm speaking like this because I can be guilty of it, right? I can be guilty of it. But I think that there's something to be said for, one of Girard's great insights, which I think is very helpful, is that things are getting worse and better at the same time.
Yeah.
you know and I think that it's important to kind of reflect on that, because whatever state someone finds their soul in, the trap is to blame the external world for that. So in other
Yeah.
words, someone goes down into the grave and goes into eternity kind of bitter, um disenfranchised, all those things, and they could say to some degree, well, it was the world. But that's not really an excuse, because the world in of itself, this is one of the, I mean, just me pulling heavily on my vocation, this is one of the threads the demons weave, right, into the kind of the mass psyche, which is that it's all pointless. I mean, nihilism is fundamentally a demonic whisper.
Yeah.
And when people begin to think like, yeah, it's all pointless, it begins to really undermine very subtly the character of God, God's love, God's purpose, God's whatever, because, he's made the world so sure that shall not be moved. And so when we understand that in this proper context, it's supposed to engender into us hope, because as St. Maximus would tell us, the whole creation is longing to be redeemed, not just man on a moralistic level, right? Because I think that's part of the problem, is people just default to like, oh, moralism, and just like, I just want to stop, doing the bad moral act, and just kind of like get out of here, and just get on to eating, whatever I'm going to be eating in paradise. And I think that's a wrong, I know that's a wrong approach,
Right.
because there's too much that points otherwise. I mean, I'll give you a great example. On the one hand, like in my context, there's people who are like, let's say, purists. They'll be like, yeah, Byzantine architecture, Byzantine chant, Byzantine, and there's value in that. But the problem is that the purist oftentimes will lose sight of the bigger thing, right?
Yeah.
Losing the forest for the trees type of situation, right? So now in this time, the potential for the living tradition, the development of something that has its root in antiquity, and that is a good root, but how does it stay living? How does it not become a museum?
Yeah.
Right? It has to now move forward with the reality of human culture, human lives. Are you following what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that in of itself is one of the problems with all this, um, you know, this very kind of that 80s, 90s apocalyptic approach to
Yeah.
things, is the fact of like, let's just hurry up and get it done. It's all gonna, kind of gonna burn,
Yeah.
you know? And one of the ways to understand that, when St. Peter talks about that, is that burning is a revelation. Because remember, are off to say, apocalypse means to reveal.
Yeah.
And the thing is like, we're living, one of the biggest problems, I think, is that for those who don't realize it, we are living in the apocalypse.
Right.
But for those of us who realize it, it's been wonderful. It's
Yeah.
been great watching the scales fall off the eyes of people, seeing how vapid the Hollywood industry is.
Yeah.
It's been great seeing the scale fall off the eyes of people who see how vapid,
Yeah.
and frank, I think how vapid and false the political system is. It's been great seeing people wake up to it and say, let me invest in something that's real,
Right.
that's transformative, right? That's the value of the apocalypse,
Yeah.
right? And so it's as simple, although not easy, but it's as simple as making that kind of paradigmatic shift into saying, instead of saying everything's terrible, we're just waiting for God to clean this up, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And start saying like, God is with us in this. And and here's the thing, keeping that royal path of not falling to utopianism.
Yeah.
That's the other side of this. And that's what you have to watch out for, is
Right.
I'm not advocating for like, we got to build the utopia here.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm saying. But there's a tension that we have to carry.
Yeah.
And that's the art of it.
Yeah.
The art is that tension.
Do you think some of this has to do with the ecclesiastical biography or history of the different traditions? Like, for example, the two traditions that tend to be more triumphalistic. They're not that way in its totality. But I'll put it this way: some of the biggest advocates of a more optimistic eschatology would be people like Bishop N.T. Wright from the Anglican tradition, or some of the post-millennialists on the Reformed tradition. Think about that. A theological outlook, and his is not the dominant, I would say, of the Church of England, but just like a theological outlook from an empire that used to run the world for a long time. Is a triumphalist framework that you can kind of see that working, whereas a lot of Orthodox tradition and institutions are in communities that were long occupied and invaded. And so in that worldview, when you're long under the yoke of somebody else who doesn't share your worldview at all, it starts to inform the emphasis that you place on your eschatological outlook. Okay, well, we certainly not going to be running anything for a while, so let's just be the perfect, holiest we can be, and do what we can within the space that we have to work with, versus the reformers, right? The Puritans and so forth coming over to America, and these reform guys saying, hey, we're taking over a new world. There's a whole new world. There's a whole new city on a shining hill, shining city on a hill. And so therefore, let's build a utopia. Oh, that's too far. But hey, let's keep thinking we can, Christ is triumphant in history. This is a better place than the old world. And, that kind of, those two kind of voices that are not in any way dominant in the traditional conservative Christian outlook across all the different spectrums of traditions tend to be within cultural frameworks that had a little bit more relatively recent or some successes, some victories informing their history and their remembrance of things.
Well, I think that there's and maybe this kind of brings us to some degree back to the earlier kind of movements of our conversation, where I do think that there's some fundamental shifts that happen with worldly success. And I think that that's especially where you can see asceticism not being introduced, but let's say asceticism being maintained in the life of well, definitely in the life of, I can say, in the Orthodox tradition, because asceticism, takes on a different emphasis and need actually in the successes, to put it in a more kind of neutral space, because one could say the decadence of Byzantine power, let's say.
Yeah.
But that asceticism, as it's exemplified by the monastics, it takes on an eschatological kind of color, tone. And that eschatological tone, I would argue, is a proper one, because it was nothing more than a realization of what the fruit of that success would be. So in other words, those early fathers, they realized that as the church was moving into this era of kind of political freedom and ease, that there's a natural, inevitable reaction response to that, which is the spirituality, the temperature, the pressure to build the diamond, if you will, would lessen. It would have to lessen. And they weren't wrong. They weren't wrong, right? So this is one of the things that I think is difficult in regards of, in a, kind of the argument. So for instance, like in my case, I see myself as a fairly traditional priest, right? But traditional in not the externals that some people hold to, as evidenced by, I tend to have a more kind of apocalyptic approach to the fall of Byzantium, right? Where I see a lot of traditionalists, they're pining for Byzantium and for these things. And I'm like, no, Byzantium fell for a reason, right? Because the Symphonia there's great aspects to the idea of Symphonia, but we can see that it didn't hold because the temptation's too great. to take, the purple mantle. Instead of the purple mantle of the scourged Christ, you take the purple mantle of a Pilate, right? That's inevitable. We can see that, right? And we can see the way that it begins to wear down on some of the sensibilities, because I think that to some degree, that otherworldly experience is precisely where the on the one hand, the otherworldly experience is where the desire for more is birthed out of, but the otherworldly experience is also where the reality and the engagement happens. So in other words, one of the things that's missing from this discussion is that even if it's minute, even if it's small, even if it's just a sliver, there are people who do experience and touch the quote unquote miraculous. There are people who do experience and touch the quote unquote otherworldly. And especially in this season, right? To me, right now is the season to preach, because everyone, what is why peace on earth and goodwill towards men? Why?
Yeah.
Because Herod just slaughtered all of the infants, right? Are we not in the time of the slaughtering of infants, right? Are we not in the time of great upheaval? Are we not in the time of Rome's occupation, right? And the reason why I'm saying this is because when you realize that Emmanuel has come, that's where you rejoice at. You rejoice in the fact that Emmanuel has come. And you can't really rejoice in that unless you have some tension with that apocalyptic eschatological character. And that leads you to this place where I think this is the thing, getting back to floating ships and anti-gravity, let's get to that. I walk that back a little bit, and this maybe is an interesting conversation where the conversation can go. I don't completely adhere to this idea that, we kind of come up with a thing, right? I adhere a little bit more to the idea that these advancements, these revelations are just that, they're revelations, they're revealed to man.
Yeah.
And it's not so much like, come on, like I understand and I appreciate your point on, the dominion mandate. But I think that the dominion mandate in this context post-fall has more to do with ushering in man into sanctification than it is man kind of doing something where, so in other words, it's not like God sits there and goes like, wow, Jimmy, I can't believe you figured out how to fly.
Yeah.
Like it's not, God's not looking down and being like surprised by us being able to, develop chimeras again. He's like, oh my goodness, the transistor, man. Did you see what they did? Hey, angels, look what my little humans are doing.
Yeah.
That's not what's happening, right? In fact, I would say that much of these technological advances from a biblical perspective are actually revealed to us as a trap to really pull us into a place where we leave off of the dominion mandate, ironically enough, because as we begin to build our Tower of Babel, we begin to say, well, who's God?
Yeah.
Right? And so instead of communing with God through the ocean, and believe me, I'm not turning druid on you, but like, instead of communing with God with these basic things, we begin to be seduced into thinking that our empires that we build are something.
Yeah.
And in reality, I think we miss some of the greater things. Let me just kind of like in on this, because I know I'm going on a big diatribe, but some of the stories, and I don't know if they exist. I just, there's a point in time in my life when I was writing fiction, and particularly in the realm of like the medium of graphic novels and things like that. There's always been a thread that I've always been fascinated with. And anytime I see a story that kind of even begins to intimate this kind of narrative, I'm always attracted to it. And that is, a world in which there is a real tension between those who are kind of like technocrats and techno wizards, right? Technomancy, as I would like to say, and those who have found that although it's a slower, tougher road, that the road through creation gives the greater revelation, the greater experience, right? That kind of, so if you almost like, if we're looking at it in like a fantasy realm, it's like you got the naturalist against like the technical thing, right? And like, I don't want to build a false dichotomy, but
Right.
the reason why I'm saying this is because when you realize, and this is one of the big problems with like, let's say transhumanism, is that every movement, it would be great, yes, if we could, for instance, that family that lost their daughter due to cancer or due to, right, like, yes, and God, it's clear in the scriptures, God's given doctors wisdom to heal. So I'm not saying like faith healing only, we got to pray for them, that's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But I think that there's something to be said for when we begin to neglect the fact that God dwells within man.
Yeah.
And the universe that we really need to explore is an inward one, because one of the problems with the advancements of technology in the way that I think people are looking at it, and when they realize that it is more revelation than and discovery than it is like, oh, I've kind of like come up with this, is that they're very easily seduced to say like, well, who is God? And that's kind of why we're here.
Yeah.
Right? Is, well, who is God? What, like, why we even need to bother? Do you see what I'm saying? And I think that's the thing about Christmas in particular, is that getting back to this understanding of like, if you begin, well, what's the reason for the season? As trite as that sounds, if you dig in on that phrase becomes a pinhole by which you can really go deeper if you want, and lead people to these more expanding understandings of like, what does it mean for us to be man, and what, like, getting the temperature, Right.
For sure. Now, I have a few things that I want to unpack there. That's very good. First of all, you think about, well, Peter Thiel, the investor and venture capitalist, he says that he's concerned about the Antichrist, and this, kind of I think he kind of means something like what's being built to have this global governance and so forth. But he says within the spectrum of Constantine to Mother Teresa, he would have his preferences to lean closer to Constantine. In the sense of, sometimes you look messy getting into the ring of things, but he would rather, if he had to pick between that spectrum, lean more towards Constantine's approach to Christianity than Mother Teresa's. I don't know much about Mother Teresa other than what the kind of storyline about that on the media. But then you have this idea of, theosis on an individual level. You would say, I don't think it works linear in some perfect line, but you would probably say, I'm imagining that you, as you are now, are hopefully pursuing, like that trajectory better than you were at 12 years old and better than you were at 21, right? Does that not also work for the human species? Does the human species collectively, in its restoration to its original, in fulfilling the dominion mandate through the second Adam, does it not also experience a kind of theosis trajectory in history, although not a perfect direction by any means, lots of pitfalls and traps and curly cues along the way, but it's still, we are going somewhere, and it's not down the gutter necessarily. If you think that, because it's always easy to say, oh no, wait a second, hey, you can't do that, you're not Christ. But it's almost like, well, Christ says, you're going to be my body, and I am going to save the world, and I will save it through my body in history, in time. It will all be redeemed, and it's not going to be all Pollyanna by any means. And we're obviously the worst team in the world with the greatest. I always say it's like those 90s movies, like Little Giants and stuff, where you've got this mastermind coach and the goofiest team of outcasts with bubble gum and bellies and, oversized helmets. You know what I mean? That's his team. He's the guy to work with this great coach, who's also on it's not a perfect analogy because he's in the team and he's on the game field and everything, but But the thing is like, he's got the worst team in the world of goofballs, but he's gonna pull off a victory while we're stumbling and bumbling and tripping over our shoelaces down
Yeah.
touchdown zone. That's kind of my view of where history's going. So when I look at something like Christians should have a vocation of curing cancer and anti-gravity, I see that as mimicking Christ's work on earth. And if you do that in a stupid way, like, hey, I'm a tech guru,
Mhm.
then that's obviously not the point. But if you do that in a Christ liturgical way, as this is the worship, this is another means of worshiping the beauty of God's creation, that I trust that God has created abundance in every atom of the universe, and that we should not limit ourselves to more technologically retarded forms of energy and everything like that, in which I think evil people want us to stay there. They want us to stay in a state of artificial lack and scarcity, because that's the means by which they can put a pressure cooker environment to get people off of the things of God. So I think in some ways, and I know there's always that, well, if we had all of our material needs met, we'd all find something to be wicked. I get that, but I almost feel like that's almost like a Christian cop out of saying, you know, what's the point of leaving Satan's plantation, man? If we get out of here, yes, we're slaves, and yes, it's pretty bad, and there's hardly anything to eat, and it's really horrible, and we're mistreated, and we're assaulted, and we're victims. But look past those tree lines there, and there's another plantation down the road, and they'll probably catch us, and it'll be worse. And there's alligators, and there's mosquitoes. And once we get our freedom, what are we going to do? Because you and I don't like each other, and we're probably going to make a worse thing of it. So let's just stay here. And I'm like, no, I don't think that's the Dominion mandate. I think the Dominion mandate is Satan's conquered, and we are his body, and everything we do should be an outworking of that worship, including levitation devices, so we don't have to pay satanic oligarchs who use Epstein Island to make a living. I mean, it's like,
Yeah, I
damn
mean,
that to hell in the name of Jesus, that kind of
right.
thing.
And so I think that is very good. I think it's part of the way that we keep attention, and I think it's lacking in regards with that. To coin, to kind of look at the phrase that you've begun to really coin, is a kind of anthropological, kind of like revolution, if you will. I think that's good. Don't get me wrong. I
Yeah.
think it's good, but I also recognize that the children of Israel were brought out of bondage, and they were brought to the promised land. And what's revealed in that process is a revelation of human nature, right?
Right.
I believe that if we begin to look at the life of the apostles being brought out of a kind of like childlike ignorance, being fishermen, being unlettered, and being brought into the kind of sophistication of being the prophets and the mouthpiece of the Christ, of the Messiah, and how they kind of reveal to us what that arc looks like. And I think the way that I've resolved what you're kind of highlighting in regards to the tension potentially of what we're saying in our conversation is this. And this kind of gets back to, I think it was, what's that guy's name? Is it Sam? I almost said Sam Cooke. There's a gentleman that had debates with Jordan Peterson a couple years ago, well-known atheist.
Oh, yeah. Sam.
Hyde? No.
Um,
Sam Hyde. That would be great. See Sam Hyde and have a debate.
yeah. Oh man, what is that guy's name?
You know what I'm talking about, though.
Yeah.
And so what I'm trying to get at is, yeah, the Sam Hyde piece. That's really good.
With his boxer persona.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
That would be great. But what I'm trying to get at is, and I come back to this a lot, is Jordan Peterson's that great example. It's just he's too easy for me to pick on. But the Sam guy, he says he goes, he's like, oh, so you told me this is what you believe in? He starts talking about the creed, and the resurrection of the dead and all this. And Jordan Peterson's like, wow, and he begins to stumble and like, wow, and he wants to find a way out of it because he doesn't want to lose all the, the tratty audience that he's had. He can't just flat out say like, oh no, of course not. That's just mythopoesis. He can't say that because he'll lose all that audience. He's got to find a way to toe the line. And so I don't have that problem, and I'll say it. It's all resolved with the fact that what everything's heading to is the resurrection of the dead. And what people don't know is death is, for those who are in Christ, it is the blessing and the beginning, right? Because death is the place where that final reconciliation happens. And it's only in death, because in death, everyone is humbled. There's no other way. And that's why your buddies are striving so hard to develop, the transhumanism approach to eternal life.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing. That's the one thing.
Sam
right?
Harris.
Sam Harris, thank you.
I had to look up Sam the Atheist on Google, and it found it.
Yeah. Sam High would be better, but yeah. So yeah. So I think that's why
the world would be a better place if we could have debates with Sam Hyde versus Peterson, and he was cutting promos against Peterson. We would have a much happier place to be.
It would be a much happier place, And I think kind of getting online with what you're saying, and that kind of Girardian move of like, hey, things are getting better and worse at the same time. I think like, hey, maybe that's what we're headed towards.
Yeah.
I think the absurdity that everyone is experiencing, some great stuff comes out of the absurdity. Where you could maybe one day have, because look, kind of getting back to your conversation, which was a good one with your buddy Shane. It's like, you got your core bear guys, doing the show in the basement, and everyone's like, well, what is this? You know what I mean? But at the same time, for as terrible as it is, and everyone wants to be a star, and everyone wants to be an influencer. And you got kids who their only dream is to become a YouTuber, right? How absurd that is.
Yeah.
Even though that's so absurd and pathetic, out of that can come these little gems, these little diamonds of something like a Sam Hyde one day maybe interviewing a Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
Because the pretentiousness, which that's what, I think that's a great word.
Yeah.
Forgive me. Because I think it approximates, at least in our language, one of the problems we have with the elites is they're so pretentious. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's where the jester, that's where the fool, the Eurodivi, the holy fool, needs to really kind of like be, kind of ascend in our society, right? Because we got plenty of fools, but we need the holy fool who can ascend and really call out with their absurdity, the pretentiousness of like the Petersons and these guys.
Yeah. Or like when that guy Oliver Anthony plays a song and he becomes number one on it reveals the loss of the external mediation of these pop star Hollywood facade that was some big other that we should lust after, when a guy in the backyard in 2023 can just put a song on and beat them all.
Yep.
Just out of nowhere, no fancy record deals, no producers,
And so forgive me, David, because I think what we're getting to is really more of kind of, and I'm not trying to say like, my point wins out over yours. I'm just saying, I think what we're approximating is kind of what I'm trying to talk about.
Yeah.
I'm speaking more about like, it's the, Oliver Anthony's. Like it isn't just like, look, I'm not the guy who's like, everyone needs to be a hesychast and praying the Jesus prayer in like in Athos and doing that. That's not what I'm saying at all.
Yeah.
I'm talking more about, it's the Oliver Anthony's. It's like the reality of that guy who has had mental health issues and blah, blah, blah. He can still tap in to God to a certain degree. And like, and we all kind of saw it, because what did he do? He basically just spoke some kernels of truth that everyone resonated with.
Kind of an Old Testament prophet style, just kind of calling out the kings for what they're doing, right?
That's it. And I think that's the thing is, as these towers and these facades, that's another great word, facades, right? As these facades are being erected, or were erected, we're seeing them kind of being torn down, but it's it's not even so much that they're being torn down. Forgive me, I think this analogy will be very helpful. It's rather that there's like this flash of light, and like as the Son of Man, lightning, right? The Son of Man, it's like it illumines everything.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not so much the facades are being torn down, they don't need to. The light is so bright.
Yeah.
When Christ shows up, you see through everything.
Yeah.
He gives everybody the X-ray vision, right? When he shows up, right? And he's so humble, he doesn't need to say, oh, by the way, that's me. Right. That's not, you know what I'm saying? And that's where a lot of the kind of like Pastor Jim Bob and all that stuff like lose it, because they think that Christ is a narcissist.
Yeah.
That wants to like shove his name down everyone's throat. That's not it either. He's so humble when he reveals things, we don't even know it's him. Right. But he is the one, the apocalypse is his light. And that's the thing. COVID, BLM, all that stuff, right? He allowed it all to come as part of the greater that's part of the revelation, because it's the thing that is needed to kind of like shock the system to be like, okay, what's going on?
Yeah.
And then you start seeing things for what they are.
Does matter as much as spirit?
Matter matters. For sure.
As much as spirit, or not as much? Is it a second class entity to spirit?
It's a false dichotomy to even try to say that. But spirit is more important now because of where we're at. Because here's the other thing. We are in the resurrection hasn't happened.
Yeah.
So we are in a particular time. That's another thing. Even though it's not linear in one sense, we can't get all lost. And like, that's part of the problem, like the preterists and all that stuff is like, let's not lose our minds, right? Let's not fall into the errors like some who are associated with the Thessalonians who are acting like the resurrection had already happened, like St. Paul talked about, right? No, I mean, the resurrection and the final judgment, those are objective points of time that haven't happened. And we can talk all day long, well, they happened in the mind of God already. It's like, okay, but you're also the same guy who would say there's no objective reality. And like Cyprian was saying the other day, if I took a knife and rammed it into your hand, you're not going to be talking about there's no objective reality, right? Yeah. Like, let's not fall into that absurdity, right? We're in this conversation, and what we're all trying to do is move more and more towards like what's objective, what's grounded, what's true. Yeah. And so death has not been done away with. And if you don't understand that, you're going to miss what they're trying to do. Yeah. Because I believe, speaking of the use of technology, which I think is given, this is just me, whatever, I tend towards like I said earlier, the Book of Enoch, the Neuralink jail, great example, right? This is just me. We're just talking, having some coffee, whatever, having a discussion. But
what's in that coffee?
Oh man, that's good. In those days, men will long for death, and death will escape them.
Yeah.
You ever wondered about that scripture? Yeah. That's one of those ones where it's just like, man,
I think that's someone's head being caught up in that that metaverse, on ice. They freeze your body and put you in
cryogenics and stuff like that.
And the wires got crossed, and you're replaying the same scene in some virtual reality bar. And you're like, holy, can someone blast it? Kill me, get me out of this hell.
Yeah. That's great. I mean, I'm going to go even more sinister with it. And they're talking about these Neuralink jails where you can put someone under for whatever. It feels like they've been in there for 100 years, 500 years, 1,000 years, whatever. Right. So imagine that.
That's like the what's that called? The Shrunken Space in that movie. The remember the lady with the teeth?
Get Out.
Yeah. Where she gets you in that hypnotic trance of nothingness. Yeah.
So like, think about that.
Yeah. That's what Kanye kind of pulled peeled the layer off of that whole onion there for a second when he showed the text messages of that weirdo that was following him around saying, hey, we're going to put you back in Zombieland. You ain't going to be seeing your kids for the rest of your life, boy, if you don't behave yourself. And then he shows up and he recently I saw on the news that same guy showed up at the hotel where Kanye was in Abu,
Oh, really?
Or something.
What happened? What happened?
You know that guy Harvey Pasternak? You remember that
Yeah,
story?
yeah.
That
I
guy
remember.
showed up at the hotel where Kanye was staying in Dubai, I believe. And there was a big story about he was just hanging out in the lobby and he tried to call the security on Kanye. I don't know, some kind of mind game or I don't, but
Whoa.
but that guy was hanging out with a lot of the celebrities. You know, he's like a handler that gets installed for these big celebrities that are there to make sure everybody knows to mouth lyrics that are degenerate and degrading to the soul and body, you know. So it's interesting how that guy's making sure everybody stays on track, and he's showing up around the world where Kanye's hanging around.
Wow.
Um, but he says that sinister, creepy thing like, "Hey, look, man, I love you." It's he said if you look at the text messages, if that's legit text screenshots, he's that Pasternak guy is sitting there saying like it sounds like a demonic. He sounds like a David Lynch youth pastor. You know, he's like, "Hey
Mm.
man, I love you, bro. I love you, bro. You're my buddy. But if you don't stop talking like this, I'm gonna put you back in zombie land like you were before, and you ain't never gonna see your kids again." It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You know, and so that makes you wonder. You know, the guy has actually got a background in intelligence work in the field of use of
Yeah,
drugs.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
disturbing. You know.
yeah. And so I think that's the thing is that should that cause us to now kind of like get in line, all of us, and just realizing the power?
Yeah.
No, because this is the way the demonic works. The demonic intimidates. Like
Yeah, like a
I'm just gonna,
Rottweiler.
yeah. I mean, but the thing is, a Rottweiler can bite you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm.
A Rottweiler can't bite you. But the thing is look,
What do
a
you
Rottweiler
do
can,
when you go to visit a parishioner in your community and you're going up the steps with your outfit and everything, and they've got a Rottweiler running towards you on a chain? Have you ever had that encounter yet?
I've had that encounter directly like that.
Do you just
Not at least
hit them
not.
with holy water at that point, or you run? What do you do?
Well, I don't know about running. I'm
I know I'm
definitely
putting
not.
you on the spot here. I just had that
Well,
visual of you
well,
like,
I'm definitely not
what does a
running.
priest do when he's got to visit a parishioner and they're really in dire straits? And
Well, because here's the thing: is a more likely thing than the Rottweiler might be. This is what I was trying to get at: is some of the intimidation tactics that the demonic will throw at you,
yeah,
and people can be like, "Okay, whatever," but the thing is, those tactics are real.
yeah,
They are
yeah,
real.
yeah,
And the demonic does intimidate people. They do, and that's part of the game is to be like, okay, well, I'm not gonna. Every time I try to pray, every time I try to do this one thing, it's
yeah,
like my marriage goes on the rocks. I get sick. Car accidents. That's a real thing for people,
yeah,
and it works. So
yeah.
that's the thing is it works because people, unfortunately, all of us, we have these moments where if we try to stand on our own, we very rarely do well, right? Because we just don't have the fortitude or the insight without grace, without God's help. So
Yeah.
I think this is important because you scale that up now to society. And that's why when people want to be like, no, we can do it, blah, 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 it's like, I guess we can, but look at Tesla.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
there's something to be said for the dominion that has been handed over. We conceded that dominion, and I think that's one of the problems of the dominion mandate narrative is that you got to put in there the fact that we conceded dominion.
but didn't Christ get it back?
Yes, but what did he get back?
The dominion
What dominion though?
of everything,
Yes,
including our atoms and our body and
but
the
the
way
thing
they
is,
malfunction when we have cancer.
but see the way that it works now is that has God done away with cancer and death?
Well, cancer
No.
popped up as a greatest hit artist because we stupidly thought we
Yeah,
could
seed
fix it with
oils.
dumb ideas, you know?
Yeah, I hear that, but you
Yeah.
understand what I'm trying to get at is the greater thing is that God uses death to redeem us, to lead us into
But do you
something.
think this gets to a great point? This is a great discussion. Do you think that, um, like when Jesus was healing people, I mean, the traditional narrative across most traditions, I would say, is probably this. It leans to this, which is when Jesus is healing people, when he's increasing their yield of fish, that all of those material blessings are really just a sign to the greater spiritual healing that he's calling them to, that their heart may be receptive to. Do you believe that? Or do you believe that, no, he's actually just as concerned with feeding your belly, increasing your fish yield, and healing your blindness, just as much as he is your spiritual blindness to the things of the spirit?
I definitely lean more towards the former than the
Yeah.
latter.
I think that's the dominant view of most traditions actually on that.
But
Don't you think?
there's a reason for that though.
Yeah.
There's a reason for that. And the reason for that is because, again, it's good to have the nuance, but the reality is that the utopianism is a very real, it's the problem. It's the problem. And it becomes the problem, especially because it's trying to mitigate the reality of the need for not even the need, but just the reality of the resurrection.
But
Because
the only people who are really pushing utopianism are the godless atheists, people like Schwab, really, like most Christians have long ago ceded the principle that our job is just work on our spiritual self and let the scientists get their Nobel Prizes. And we just kind of hang out in the corner and say, hey, God bless you and be a good boy,
yes, and
please.
obviously I'll concede that, and that's why
Yeah.
I'm arguing for a measure of moving away from that.
Right.
Because it's that's too much of a hunkering down where something's being lost.
Right.
But again, for me, like for instance, for me, the way I reconcile it is what's being lost is not so much like, oh man, Christians should have made anti-gravity. It's rather those, whatever development inspiration comes forward from a Christian, it's somehow some way it's always needs to be seen in the light of the resurrection. Because here's the thing, the resurrection of the dead,
Yeah.
like it's not an immaterial resurrection, it's the resurrection of the dead, right? And so that is when that mandate is now able to now be brought forward. Let me explain to you this way, because that's why God sent the cherubim with the fiery sword, right, to guard from going in. Because if man was to eat the fruit of the tree of life, he'd be stuck in that death state forever, spiritual death forever, right? So that's the thing, is even now God's keeping us from that greater death, or trying to, he is trying to keep us from it in regards of now putting everything in our way to help us, if we are willing to move into salvation. What is salvation? Being restored to that Adamic state. Right. That Adamic state, that is where the dominion mandate becomes fulfilled, but it becomes fulfilled in the eschaton. And that's where I think the little that's the little kind of corner you got to turn with the mandate thing. Is it's not for the sake of this world that the dominion mandate exists to, like, no, we should be having, tubes in space with, artificial avocado trees.
Well, that's the dumb version of it. Yeah, their stuff. Yeah.
Well, is it though?
It is, because it's, the guy, those guys
start somewhere.
They're right? Not proclaiming Christ, and they're not acting like it.
Sure, but like
that's all the difference.
But see, again, I would say though, but what does that mean to proclaim Christ? Because because proclaiming, you can like say like, hey, you gotta start somewhere. One day we'll get to sandworms and eating their poop and like, doing all that, right? But we're not there yet. First, we got to start off with the space cans,
yeah,
and the space avocado trees. So here, let me finish, right? You got to start somewhere, and then it's not that hard to get someone to be like, yeah, like you're Christ, yeah, and you're Christ and his Buddha and all that. See, that's the thing, is just proclaiming Christ. How do you proclaim Christ? By saying, I love Jesus, he's the best. That's not proclaiming Christ. Proclaiming Christ is bearing the cross and the death. Someone who proclaims Christ is someone who says, I'm going to lose. Yeah. That's it. That's why when Paul says, I know nothing but Christ and Christ crucified, right? Yeah. That's what that means. So anybody who wants to have a Christ who wins, no, we can win this, man. That's antichrist. Yeah. No. The way you proclaim Christ is his death and resurrection.
Yeah, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think if you are to actually be a truly faithful Christian and you were to bring technology on the scale of what we're talking about to the public without arrogance, without pride, you will be murdered or killed or
Like
disparaged.
Tesla.
You're going to go through that. So I mean, it's like I don't think that those things. I think the only way, most likely way that you're going to skirt literal persecution and crucifixion is if you're giving a false version of it, like the Bezoses of the world want to offer. Where remember, they're hating on Earth too, and well, they have they're sacralizing Earth just like every pagan
Mhm,
victim. You know, we deify
mhm,
our victims. So
mhm,
get everybody off the planet. Humans are not meant for this place. Get out. You're a defect to the planet, not the crown jewel of the planet,
mhm.
as God says. And so get them off the planet, and then the rich people hang out there and have our Tahiti vacation without all you rubes. We'll have robots bring us our pina colada. That's what they want. That's antithesis to what I'm talking about. I think the Christian says, no, we're staying on this planet. That the language that God uses in Genesis for creation is that we are to be, we're like that beautiful, like if you look in any temple and you see the icon or in the false religions the statue of the god, that's the crown jewel of the temple, that's the image of the god all the temple is reflecting, and it's culminating in that idol. Well well that's the same language going on in Genesis with creation, that humans are the vice, these we are the viceroy, we're the crown jewel. And when Christ goes through the death, burial, and resurrection, that's not the that's not the ending point. That's the beginning point that gets us not back to Eden, but better than Eden, because the Bible begins in a garden, it ends in a city. So it gives us something more than what Adam has, which is the fullness, the full picture, the full authority through him on earth as it is in heaven. And therefore, we are saved to do what? To bring glory. Everything in creation,
Yes,
including the gold molecules, including water, all of it
agreed,
is a singing
agreed,
tapestry.
agreed, agreed. But the problem is again that you are presenting something, I think, that is scaling up in a way that is unsuspectingly moving into that is the kind of like allure of, forgive me, but
Yeah,
that's where the antichrist will get even the elect.
yeah,
Because here's the thing, that's already happened.
yeah,
That's the thing. That's why, if this makes sense, that's why the kind of museum, the living museum approach is wrong, because um it isn't just for the sake of gold and whatever that Orthodox temples are adorned the way they are, because that is that vision.
yeah,
That's the thing is, Christ is ruling and reigning now.
yeah,
He's ruling and reigning now in the hearts and the real temple of his people, and the people are living out that mandate
yeah,
by taking the atoms of the gold and the frankincense and actually now manifesting that
yeah,
real life worship in the heart of the temple
yeah,
and externalizing it. See,
yeah,
that's the thing, because that's how the tension is held,
yeah,
is in that,
yeah.
right?
Well,
Because
well,
everything.
yeah. And to put the anthropological angle to it, which Gerard is he was more pessimistic about the future than I am.
Mhm.
But he said one of the frameworks that I'm operating from is the concept of, we didn't invent the scientific method. We didn't stop burning witches because we invented the scientific method. We discovered the scientific method because we stopped burning witches, which gives us this thrust in history that I think is a very accurate guide model for seeing what happened, which is, and I've said this before, that I think there really wasn't really true innovation prior to Christ. Most of technological innovations were you had the plow, but the plow was a modification of a sword to kill, or a club. These are things that were actually the technology, whether it came from on from celestial entities or it came from just human endeavor, we're always in the yoke of empire and murder and war. And then when Christ comes, he percolates this whole new concept that, wait, we're to love our fellow man. We're to build a hospital for the poor, no matter what their status is. We're to sharpen we're to, shine a piece of glass so that we can see what infection our neighbor has, no matter, so there's this downward thrust of this direction towards the manger, towards the outsider, towards the outcast, that this service calling is going to animate human endeavor towards technology, and it's going to orient technological development at a level that humans have never had prior to the entrance of Christ's incarnation. And I think that as mythology proceeds, as mythology recedes, Christian revelation can then take foot in a society. And then what typically, it's not a perfect thing, but the balance, I think, of Christ's movement in history is that as you start to see the truth rather than mythology, the truth of yourself, your heart, your desires, as well as your people and your ethnos, your culture, once you see that more and more true and you see it through Christ, you're then given this radical freedom, which allows you to say, hey, you know what? I don't have to use coercion to produce energy. I don't have to use violent means of chopping people's bodies, burning them through radiation, or poisoning them with weapons of war called chemotherapy to solve a tumor. I can, I can be more intelligent. It's like everything's moving more to that nonviolent glory that Christ is showing in every aspect of his life. And I think that we're asked to participate in that. Whether it works out that we succeed in that in history, I'm willing to say maybe that's up for, discussion. But I think that's a calling that we would, I understand exactly what you're saying. You're saying be careful with that, because that can lead you right back into the same Schwab trap, right? That you're afraid that if I pursue that too long, I'm going to be invited to TED Talks with Schwab, and he's going to say, hello, I have my Christian friend. He started as a lowly podcaster. Wait, why am I making him sound like Sam Hyde? Whatever. But you're afraid that the grandeur of such a vision is too tempting for mere Christian mortals to handle. It sounds, I'm being a little bit playful with you,
facetious like that. Yeah. I mean, because here's the thing, right? I would say that on the one hand, yes, maybe, but on the other hand, something so much more grander is see, this is the thing. Something so much more grander is people have access to, but they don't do anything with it. Because, well, okay, like for instance, I'll present to you Saint Porphyrios, right? We were talking about this last night in Catechism, which is the saints that have been revealed in these latter days are titans, man. Titans. Like Saint Porphyrios is a titan. I mean, I was explaining to them, there's that whole portion in the Doom, I think it's Children of Doom, whatever. And Muad'Dib, he gets his, there's a tactical nuke goes off and he goes blind, and he sees better than he sees better blind, blinded with his materialized, right? But like, okay, that's science fiction, whatever. Okay, thanks, Mr. Herbert. The reality of that is Saint Porphyrios, who went blind and could see better, right? Because see, the thing is, that's real. Like, that's not a projected, like maybe we can get to this, blah, blah. That's a reality. But see, the thing, people don't want to hear that because they go like, well, hold on. They don't want to hear that because they're like, well, that's not my tradition, or blah, blah, blah. Or like, hey, some kooky priest said something I don't like, so I'm just going to reject that whole thing. But the reality of it is it's always that. It's always, again, I'm getting back to the cross. And that's the thing that we always try to skirt around is the cross. And I think on the broader scale, scaling up, the problem is, where's the cross in that vision? Right? The cross in that vision is almost inherently done away with. And the fruit of it is, look how we keep advancing with these technologies, and where are we headed, right?
But is humanity in large part, we're earthworm inside of an earthworm pit, but are we able to kind of check the temperature and say we're better off since Christ came to earth? When he showed up,
absolutely,
children were being left to exposure
absolutely
on the side of the road. And
Absolutely,
yes,
we're
we're
better.
coming up with creative ways to still kill children. We get that. That's horrible.
Absolutely,
But you
absolutely,
have
we're
to
better.
hide it more. You know,
Right.
it's on its, to me, evil is on the run if you look at when Jesus shows up and where we're at today. So does that not mean we're winning?
So here's the thing. Evil is on the run in some respects. In some respects. But there's an argument to say, like, you know, in some respects, there's a boldness now because there can be a boldness, right? And I would say again, the thing I would argue is, remember, and this is why all the talk of the Antichrist is so fascinating to me, because the one thing is, for as much talk of the Antichrist as comes, people are still not going to recognize him. Why? Because he's going to present the thing that he's going to present what you're talking about, and it's going to make sense. He's going to reconcile all of it. He's going to make it all work. But the one thing he's not going to be able to do is the thing that everyone struggled with before and they struggle with now, which is that cross. Everyone's got that cross that they just, I don't know about this, right? I don't know about this vision of how things play out, Lord. You know what I mean? I'm not so sure about this. And that's the thing, is, where is the cross in these things? So it's like, look, I'm not a proponent of this idea that the eschaton, the new, it's not some Gnostic ethereal, there's no matter in the eschaton. That's no. Everything that you're saying is going to be there, right? Everything you're saying is going to be there because right, but perhaps it won't need to be there, and it won't be there. Well, not even perhaps, it won't be there in such a self-sufficient, autonomous way.
Yeah.
Right. And it won't be there to try to gap the bridge. Right. Because you got to take in mind what you're talking about, the advancements you're talking about are all advancements that are seeking to to bridge the gap between the fall, between man and creation that happened in the fall. All of it is seeming to deal with a problem that happened because of the fall.
Well,
Right?
I'm literally taking what Jesus says when he says, "You're my body," and he says, "You will do greater things than I." And I'm taking that literal, and I'm saying, okay, what is he doing most of the time? He's a minister. He's healing people. He's fixing people with their material needs. And then once he's done that as a down payment of his authority, he's then able to have a receptive audience for getting repentance. And that's the way I'm thinking, is like, well, why can't we literally aspire to that as his body? He's the mystical head. Let's give the signs and wonders in the name of Jesus, through his power, through his revelation, as a means of then allowing them to receive the authority to say, hey, you know what? We're going to listen to Christians again. They're not the dummies. They're not the Luddites. Actually, they must have the truth. Now, what are you saying to me? You're saying repent, carry your cross, okay, well, that's how Jesus built a crowd first. He had to get the eyes, he had to get the baskets of fish, and then he was able to say, repent. And I'm just literally following that and saying, can we, as his mystical body, play that same playbook over and over again in the name of Jesus, collectively?
We do play that playbook. I think the thing is number one, there's always this thought. I had a pastor once, Pastor James. I really appreciate all that he did for me. And I remember one time we used to have these men's breakfasts. It's one of the things I kind of miss being Orthodox, men's breakfasts. But yeah, had this men's breakfast, right? And he would give everybody an opportunity to speak, and so I spoke once, and I appreciated him. He tolerated me a lot because I was always talking about suffering. I was always talking about all this stuff, and even back then, right? And I'd made this point, and I was like, I said, I can't remember exactly what I said, but I said something about, like, the church, the church, she needs to do this, the church, she needs to do that, blah, blah. And he chastised me. He said, look, brother, don't say that, because you don't know what the church needs, right? And that was a very profoundly, looking back on it, that's a very Orthodox statement for somebody who wasn't Orthodox in that sense, because I'll tell you why. Because this idea that, the body should be doing something different than what the body's doing, that comes from two things. Number one, an assumption that Christ isn't heading his body.
Right.
And number two, that and this is what Pastor James is scolding me on, the assumption that because I'm not seeing it, that's not being done. And that's the thing is, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, and everything that is done in secret shall be revealed. See, here's the thing is, this is I think one of the key things, intention. So everything you're saying is great. Yeah, we should become doctors and we should become anti-gravity technicians. We should do everything. I agree with that. But what I'm also saying is, I maintain that there is a point in time when enough, like, things will end as we understand it. And the reason why things will end is because there comes a point where enough is enough. That's the thing that you have to understand. That's where I think the kind of, things going on in perpetuity is not the case. And for as much as things are better, it's like, yeah, you and I can talk, and the king isn't coming and taking my 2 daughters and enslaving them and boiling me in oil just because he woke up and didn't have coffee. Okay, yeah. That's not happening, but it's happening kind of again, right? It's like, if you're wearing a black and yellow certain type of, Fred Perry shirt, you might have just gotten 20 years in federal prison for something that you weren't even present, you weren't even involved with. You see what I'm saying? So we're coming back around to it. And, the 20th century has shown us how medieval we actually still are.
Yeah.
With all the communist regimes. So that's why it's like, okay, yeah, we're making these incremental steps in some regard, sure. But at the same time, 2 things. We can still get medieval real quick. And number 2, there are these places that are hidden.
Yeah.
Where Christ is being held as king, and where something greater than technology is being brought forth into the world every day.
Yeah. And don't forget, the gospel is a technology too. It allows us to see things differently.
Yeah, like carpenter, tecton, right?
Yeah.
Jesus was a tecton, right?
Yeah.
Carpenter. I get it.
I mean, I think we've done I think this discussion, although we haven't overtly tied it to 2023, is a great discussion, and looking back at where we are in this time in our culture. And I do want to land the plane quickly briefly with because I did want to talk to you about this, about the aliens. Okay. Now, so, and we'll try to make this as brief. Won't be to do justice. Maybe we'll have to do some more of this later, but I have been seeing this for some time. My friend Shane says I've seen it many years more than I remember, but I don't know. But I've been seeing this narrative build about the aliens. Now, most conservative, anti-establishment minded folks take the position that it's a government hoax of one thing or another. They say it's to distract us from something. I don't buy that. You can distract us with anything. You don't take an elaborate drip drop of weird fuzzy videos. I don't know. I think you could do something much easier to distract people without the ridiculousness and the strain and credulity that it's going to create, that it has created by the government dripping this out. So I don't think you need to do that. But some people say it's a distraction. Some people say it's an attempt for some faction in the Pentagon to raise more money, create more money for Space Force, blah, blah, blah. Some people say it's preparing for this fake alien invasion that's going to unite the world with global government. That's a trope that people always talk about on the traditional anti-establishment side. Other people say that it's actually going to be some type of entity, but it's some kind of demonic evil entity that's going to masquerade as aliens. And then there's a few other variations within those spectrums. That's basically the general view of the anti-establishment conservative view. There's also a more normie kind of view that says, well, there might be ET and it has no problem with my Christian faith. And there's been folks saying that, like Tim Burkett. He's one of the Republican guys in Tennessee House. He's a U.S. House representative from Tennessee, and he has been leading the charge on the disclosure based on the things that he's seen in classified settings. And he's a good old, evangelical Christian, Bible believing, fundamentalist type, I guess. It seems to be an honest broker. And he says there's something real here. And he said, and famously, if the war pigs find out, if he said, just imagine, folks, is there something without any heat signature and its propulsion has no energy transport, energy trail, heat trail. that's something the war pigs don't want us to have, because you ain't gonna be able to send our boys to fight off for these wars anymore. And so, with that said, that's the foundation of that. I have been seeing, through different places, you've got this kind of two religions that are emerging in preparation for this. You got one which is more of the materialist triumph, which says, see, we told you we were nothing but, evolved things. Yeah, there's a little intelligent design signature at the bottom, but that was just aliens monkeying with us, right? To make us who we are. They seeded the planet, and that's who we are. And they're going to come and reveal that we're your gods and we created you. And it's going to be a big test for your faith. Number two is something kind of like that, but it says more like, it's more of a spiritual dynamic. So it's more in keeping with Eastern religion, like Hinduism and stuff, where there's these telekinesis, telepathy, all these different phenomena, near death experiences, all are something real, but it's actually something that the aliens control us. They've got us in a prison planet. Whenever we die, they grab our souls and throw it in another body. That's reincarnation. And I think that's going to be kind of the spectrum that a lot of folks are going to move towards if this stuff starts to credibly be, pushed and people buy into it. So I know there's a lot there, but you can dive in how you want. But first of all, is it just from the ground floor? Do you believe it's compatible to believe in the existence of extraterrestrial beings? And is that compatible with Christian faith?
It can be. There's I haven't read it, so just full disclaimer. But I've talked with enough people, and I've read enough of the kind of crib notes in regards of the space trilogy by C.S. Lewis, in particular the third book, The City of Strength, where he gets into that, and these planets and these civilizations that didn't fall, and what does that look like, so sure, we could do all that, but I lean towards an understanding of, if it's metal, it's government. If it's immaterial, it's demonic, right? And so it's not. I don't necessarily think it's wise to always assume that various strands of theory are in cahoots. I think that there's
various strands of what?
Theory are in
Okay.
cahoots. So there may be competing ideas, not just ideas, maybe competing powers, right? Because that's the other thing people don't understand. The demons aren't a team. They don't, they don't get along and like, hey, it's like there's hatred there's hatred amongst themselves.
Yeah.
That there is a hierarchical understanding that they obey, but it's like not obedience of love, it's a compulsion. So I'm just saying that in the sense of also understand that I've had my runs with the military, and there's incompetence on high levels. So though I think that's one of the problems, where when you're swimming in a kind of quote unquote, in a course with this is problematic, but you're swimming in a kind of quote unquote conspiracy theory mindset of things like incompetence, you always have to kind of keep in the foreground, not in the background, in the foreground, because like you know I was saying earlier in conversation, what's lacking is sobriety from a lot of these discussions. So it's like, yeah, I think it's evident that there is governmental, political, and that isn't just US, that's worldwide governance in regards of there's this material reality of something. And how does it overlay? I don't know. You could talk about, we're getting back to what I was saying about, were these things inspired, or were certain aspects of technology given, like, by fallen ones? Okay, whatever. But then this moves us into this idea of, well, who are the fallen ones? And I think one of the things you'll see consistently, and this is where the evidence of, we would say, them being demonic, is everything's going to play well except for Christ. And like the real Christ, not the Christ teacher prophet who's acceptable for everyone else, but the Christ as he has been held by his body, which is, he is the second person of the Trinity, God incarnate, Christmas time, came and walked among us, all that stuff, you know, born of the Virgin Mary, the creed, essentially, getting back to Sam Harris, right?
Yeah.
So that is where I think you begin to kind of parse out, because there's no question in those things, I think, when you bring Christ in, because Christ reveals. So we're talking about, you know, part of the narrative too is like, someone just sent me this, I haven't got a chance to watch it. Like Tucker Carlson's talking about it. You know?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's why if the number one guy from cable can talk about it, I can talk about it. Okay.
You know what I mean?
I'm safe. He gave me safety to talk about this
So it's
without
like,
being a weirdo.
So
Okay.
so the thing that I've caught is, you know, what's being talked about more. And like, I've been saying this, not to be that guy, but I'm one of those people that's been talking about this for years too, in the sense of, you know,
you're trying to tell me you were into Star Wars before Tucker. Okay, I get it.
I'm just saying.
I found Star Wars before Tucker.
I'm just saying. I'm going to pull my references, right? My references are Father Seraphim Rose, Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future.
Yeah, okay.
Right? He wrote that in what?
Yeah.
80, 79, something like that, 78.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is I'll bring in is good old Art Bell. Though most people don't even know who Art Bell is anymore. You know what I mean? That's how far we've gone. People don't even know who Art Bell is, but everyone knows about conspiracies, right?
Did Father Seraphim Rose was he ever interacting with Art Bell? No, right?
He posthumously he was.
Oh, okay.
Because there were some episodes. I remember one episode in particular. I was just new into the church, and there was a guy on there, and he was talking about. He's like, "Well, there was actually this guy. He was a guest on." Yeah. He said there was actually this guy. He was an Orthodox monk who was talking about the aliens as a demonic entity, you know. And so Art Bell's like, well, "That's fascinating." It might have been George Norrie at the time. It was like, well, "That's fascinating." Anyways, the point I'm trying to bring up is there's an old Art Bell episode, which if anybody knows what I'm talking about, it's like the famous episode where the guy calls in.
Yeah.
He's lost his mind. He's scared. You know what I mean? And he's like, they're interdimensional beings, right? Yeah. They're not aliens. They're interdimensional beings. And it's like, that's another way of saying spiritual and demons.
You remember Crocodile Dundee, that movie?
Yeah.
You remember the scene where the guy, he's in the New York bar, and this cross-dresser approaches him, and he has to figure out what this is. He says, "That's not a lady," or something like that.
Yeah.
Why do I keep going with an Irish accent for it? But it's okay. But I keep doing the character from Austin Powers, the big Scottish guy. I'm trying to be PG here, but it's not a lady. But he's like, that's not a lady, and so he does the check, right? So, and forgive me for that crudeness here. Apologize for that, but we're dealing with the world as it is. But imagine, okay, it's 2035. You're a seasoned priest, and you're
That's an interesting date, by the way, you just threw out there. Did you do that on purpose?
No. What's that?
Interestingly enough, the date calculated for Pascha ends at 2035. Like, that's as far as it's
what? Oh no. Oh wow.
Okay. Yeah, hold on. This is too great because I love how you just did that, right? Oh gosh, I erased the text. Yeah. If you look it up, the date, oh man, just was reading this was calculated up to 2035. So it's interesting that you threw that date out there. Anyways, go ahead.
Well, let's say you forgot that, so you're not on edge for that moment. You forgot that happened. You just finished liturgy, and I don't know what what you guys do. Maybe you have coffee. Do you have coffee hour?
I mean, you get pretty wild. Yeah.
Okay.
We got all kinds of stuff.
Okay, so let's say it's an evening thing. You're getting settled in to have a meal, and you hear and you open it, and it's one of these little beings. Then it's like, hey, we're here now. You saw us for years, and I'd like to talk to you. What's your check? Just like Crocodile Dundee, how do you check whether that is a legit being from another planet?
Yeah.
Or is that an entity? What's your check before you let him into the gates of that church community?
Christ is in our midst.
And what's he going to say?
Well, if he doesn't say anything,
are you checking to see if he's Catholic or not, or what?
I'm going to say, what's the response, right? Christ is in our midst, right? Did you know the secret handshake? Yeah. You know the secret word, right? Right? Because here's the thing. We have this in our tradition where people will come, and so for instance, in a monastery, Every time you enter into the room, right? Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And there's a certain response that comes from that. And if that response isn't given, one of the things is like, don't go in the room.
Right.
Right. Even if you see someone in there, because that may not be who you think it is.
Yeah.
Right. We also have in our tradition, there's certain things, which I won't give away all the codes and secrets, but like, there's certain things that we do have checks for, because this is a long-standing thing in our tradition of encountering things, and it doesn't even have to be grays or Palladians or whatever. It could be, hey, didn't I just see you 5 minutes ago over there?
Yeah.
How are you standing in front of me here now? Right.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah,
but what if it's like it looks at you and it's a little white being and it's got little greasy hands or whatever? And I mean, I'm making a primordial archetypal situation. You're in this situation because this is a picture for the broader question, And he says that, and he's like, "Yes, Aslan is wonderful." Okay, what do you do then? Like how close to the language of our program of what we experience Messiah as does he have to align, or she or whatever have to align with to be like, okay, this is not evil. You know what I mean? Like, what is that?
Here's the thing to help you out with.
This is anthropology, by the way. 101.
I got you. Here's one of the things to really help you out with. This question and this kind of scenarios is able to stand if you've never had an encounter with entities or with the angelic, which they're not eating ham sandwiches and voting for Biden, right? So, but if you've had encounters with them, then that's why it's kind of like the speculative nature of it. I'm not into the speculative nature of it, because not to be that guy to put myself out there, but I have had encounters with entities.
Wait, but aren't angels depicted as eating in the Old Testament and stuff, and fellowshipping?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
and
he could
many
eat.
Many people entertain angels unawares, right? But what you're positing is that, well, how do you know that it's not going to be like, like you said, Oswan or whatever? It's like, well, Oswan is just how we say Jesus on planet Primus 9-4, whatever.
Yeah, Aslan. Yeah, I was thinking of Aslan. I was going with your C.S. Lewis idea that.
Oh, you mean Aslan?
Yeah, that's what I was going
okay.
for.
So the thing is that, again, there are checks that are there which are not super sophisticated, right?
Yeah.
And the sophistication is part of how the deception happens, because those with faith they see through the sophistication.
Yeah.
Sophistication is just basically, in the spiritual realm, seduction.
Yeah. But I'm trying to take the simplest explanation in the sense of the normie perspective, which may not be wrong, which is they say there's these little entities. They say it's not the government. Assuming all that's correct, if they start making contact and they're not going off with the classic tropes that conservatives and Christians are expecting, like, you're going to come in here and tell me you made me. Well, they're not doing that. What if it's just more ambiguous? What if it's more like, yeah, man, we came from another planet and they're talking to you with their mind? Are you going to start burning them at the stake because they're talking with their mind? Like, what's the framework by which we determine that to be, not against us? Whoever's again, not against us is, what's that saying? What does Jesus say?
Who's not against us is for us.
Yeah. How do you know? What if it's like, hey, guys, we're not the guys. No, I know what you're talking about. Those guys are coming next week. Not that we're just here to hang out because we flew here, We're just trying to get to know you and,
Well, here's the thing is, again, the presupposition is that there isn't going to be things that are, the presupposition that you're working on is that there aren't universal experiences that Christians have that aren't universal. So your presupposition is that everything that traditional Christians experience is kind of made up for themselves, and it's not universal. And so since it's made up and universal, or it's kind of like it's a kind of tradition-wide delusion, right? That's the working presupposition that's running in the background of how you're positing it. And what I'm saying is there are things that are universal, right? That they transcend 20th century understanding of quote unquote traditional Christianity.
So you're saying when you're maybe I'm misunderstanding. You're saying when that thing show up in the door, you're gonna know if it looks like a duck, it's a duck. You know,
Mhm.
you're not gonna have to ask them, hey, what's who? Tell me who you with. You know, JT Money. Who is this
Um,
off-brand guy? You know,
yeah,
remember that?
I don't know JT Money, but yeah, that's definitely that's a thing.
You're saying
And
it
again,
ain't gonna be hard to tell. It's gonna be
no,
like this is evil.
no,
You're just
and
gonna feel
that's
the vibe, right? Is that what you're
and
saying? Kind of.
listen. Uh, I mean, I want to be that guy, but I had someone contact me in 2021 who had something basically happen what you were talking about, right?
Oh,
And he started describing all these things and, and kind of what they were saying to him and his experience and all this and that. And he gave a couple key details and I was like, "Oh, that's what this is because of this and because of this."
right.
And he legitimately didn't know. And when I explained to him that's what this is, this and this, it opened up to him. Not because I was saying to it, because the truth is a person that was revealed, because those things are universal. It
Right.
didn't matter that they were presenting themselves to him as clockwork elves. That
Okay.
didn't
Yeah.
matter
Yeah.
because there are certain things where, he wouldn't have known. He wouldn't have known that I would have known certain things. And I'm not trying to be that guy, but the average kind of like ortho bro who's just, worried about, the history between, the Pope in 1054, he's not going to know the things that I was pointing out either.
Yeah.
But I said, well, what about these two things in
Yeah.
particular, which I'm not going to say they are. These two things are this and this. And he was like, wow. And everything clicked together. And he came to me genuinely confused. He
Yeah.
was genuinely like, I don't know what these things were and how basically how you're positing it. How should I approach these things? I'm like, they're demonic because of this and because of this, right? So that's
What's
what I'm
that
trying.
framework though? I mean, you don't have to spell it all out today, but I mean, the reason why I'm creating that scenario is I'm trying to crystallize it so that whatever this thing turns out to be, whether it's a giant hoax or it's spiritual entities or it's just harmless little aliens, I'm saying within that, or it's just government, whatever it is, but within that framework, we'll if it's government hoax, they're incompetent, they're humans, they'll mess it up, we'll figure it out, just like with the lockdowns and the masks, we'll figure that one out. I'm betting pretty bullish on that one. If it's entities, that's a whole nother ball game. And then I'm trying to be realistic and say, okay, what if it's just a harmless entity and he shows up and you're like, are you Eastern Orthodox? He's like, what are you talking about? We didn't have that schism here. We're getting along back where we're from in Andromeda. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So
Yeah. So that's what I'm trying to tell you. That's what
yeah,
I'm trying to tell you is that you're making a presumption that, well, this is just how God kind of like explained Revelation here on earth, the Trinity and all that, kind of getting to your boy Ridley Scott,
yeah,
and his vision with Alien and
yeah.
what were they called, the
Prometheus.
engineers.
Yeah,
Yeah. And so what I'm trying to say to you is that that narrative, right, is a false narrative. And the reason why we say it's a false narrative is because this is where it becomes. This is what I was trying to get about. Like, no, that's too simple. I can't accept that. That's too simple. And that's how the goats get weeded out from the sheep,
yeah,
right? Because the goats like, no, it can't be that simple. But the thing is like, our saints aren't just these relegated to antiquity. Like, we have living communion with them, and not just in the kind of mythopoetic way.
yeah,
I'm trying to say that this is the thing. I know it's too hard. I know it's hard for people to wrap their mind around, but there are things that you encounter when you are in that pen
yeah.
that point you to universal truths that transcend those things. So I won't even need to say, "Are you Eastern Orthodox?" It's like, even the fact that like we're kind of stuck in that sense.
Right.
It's like I'm trying to like we're talking about what's going around the kitchen table, and I'm like, hey, and I see this. I see people all the time who've never left the neighborhood where I'm at in Kansas City. They've spent their whole life and they've never left the East Side. So when I talk to them about Decini Monastery and all of a sudden that, they look at me. I might as well be talking about Planet Zorb
Mhm.
when I talk to them about, Essex and England. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That it's just like that.
Are you suggesting that the way in which redemptive history is to unfold according to the church and scripture is such that you are confident that such entities that visit us will not be aliens, but rather entities of spiritual, like that's what you're talking about. Is that what you're getting at? Is that why you're saying I don't even accept that scenario? Because you're saying in the way in which I believe the church and scripture portrays it, that kind of scenario, although theoretically possible, hypothetically possible, there could be an entity. If it's showing up to hang out with us, it's not an alien, it's a demon thing. Okay. Is that what you're getting at there?
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying.
You're saying, so is it that in the redemptive history, in the redemptive rules, that if there are other life forms in the universe, God's going to keep them sequestered at this point in time, and if they're, and so that's our litmus test for knowing if something's hanging out with us from another place, we know it's not another.
How about a different way? I can flip it for a different way. That God, the revelation, because God, the only reason why you even know anything about God is revelation, and that revelation is universal. And and I don't mean universal just as in like the known lands and the barbarians don't know, right? I mean in the sense of we understand the spiritual realm, interdimensional, however you want to look at it, whatever makes someone comfortable to accept, that reality is just that, right? And so what's fascinating is to some degree, I just looking at it objectively as a case study, we're in this conversation, we're seeing how all the kind of deception can easily unfold, because what's being presented, when I'm presenting as simple, it's too hard to wrap the mind around. It can't be that simple. It can't be that
you're
myopic.
saying that they will know the name Jesus in every dimension, in every planet, and every dimension. Is that
so?
Or they will know Yeshua or something approximate to that.
Yeah, because here's the thing. You said like if they start talking to you telepathically and all this stuff, right? So again, this is kind of the problem that you run into with people like, some of, these confused people who like, these Hebrew Israelites, like for instance, they're like, no, it's Yeshua. Jesus is that's Zeus. And it's like, okay, you know how to say Eric in Spanish? Enrique. You know what I mean? It's like people confuse translation and transliteration. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, you see how this begins to devolve? And I think this is fascinating because that's part of how this works, is that things like translation and transliteration, because the emotional, like, I got something in my craw that's making it hard for me to accept that it's this simple.
Yeah.
Will cause all these other things, which otherwise I would be able to work through very easily.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what happens. And that's part of kind of getting back to the early part of the conversation, which is the anxiety that is inculcated in people. It compromises their ability to actually, paradoxically enough, look at these things rationally.
Right.
Because that's the lack of sobriety. Because when we look at it soberly and rationally,
yeah.
Right. And then you just kind of hear what I'm saying, how I'm laying it out. It's like, well, yeah, because just reducing it to like, do they got to say Jesus in the American way? Well, no.
Yeah, I don't mean that. I don't mean that, but they've got to communicate in some way that they're on page with understanding God as we know it. I guess I'm, as a rationalist, biased towards that, I guess, because of my culture. I'm trying to kind of get at what's the litmus test to know that they know what we're talking about and we're on the same page, because I think that's important for people.
Sure. Let me give you an example. It's tough too, because people are like, I can't handle this anymore. Every time he asks something, this dude in the black hat keeps giving these miraculous anecdotal answers. But
during the Clone Wars, Anakin.
So, there's a whole thing with like, you want to talk about tongues. Well, there was the Mashka, the priest's wife of the.
Tell me you're not taking the alien to a Pentecostal revival service.
No. Okay. No. Long story short, getting back to this thing, she went to, old black lady, became Orthodox convert, wanted to go, had a love for the Russian martyrs, the real martyrs, had a love for St. John Maxovich, went to his church in San Francisco, did not and does not know a lick of Russian, right?
Yeah.
is trying to go and venerate his relics. And long story short, someone says basically, yeah, go ahead and just go over there and pray to Vladika and blah 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 blah, whatever. She just kind of pushes her way through the crowd, whatever. Someone, after she's honored and venerated relics, someone pulls her aside and says, Russian? And she's like, no, I don't know Russian. She's like, that person just spoke to you perfect Russian. How did you know? Right? That's just one little example, anecdotal example of like the way that we understand communication, right?
Yeah.
That's part of the problem is you're overlaying
Right.
the limitations of your rationalism.
Well, because I'm still assuming the reason why I'm still assuming that the scenario of the most simplest thing, although it's the wildest thing, is that there just are from another planet. And so they're going to have their own language and their own way of describing the world. And that there might be a little bit of a translation issue, just like when we met tribes that had never experienced the gospel, there was a little bit of a translation issue. So I'm taking it as anthropology here for a moment. And I'm just assuming the simplest explanation without already defaulting like most conservatives and Christians do, which is it's demons. I'm saying, okay, it could be demons, most likely demons. That sounds right. But what if it's just a random ET and just a translation issue?
Right. And so
we don't want to kill him and call him a demon because he's just visiting.
Right. And I think that's where you should read out of The City of Strength and Perelandria, because if I'm not mistaken, again, the disclaimers, I haven't read it, he addresses that. But as I understand, he addresses is that they're still operating on the universal framework.
Right.
And the universal framework, it isn't like, and this gets you into like the God that you have, Christians, is really this kind of twisted thing. So that's the setup for someone's gonna come and say like, it's all been twisted. Here's the real thing. Right. And that's, sorry, but like,
would they have gone? Here's a side trivia question I have. Would they have gone through a similar scapegoat mechanism delusion, in your opinion?
Well, if they didn't fall, they wouldn't have to.
But is it possible that there's an alien species that didn't fall?
Sure. Let's argue that that's the case. But the distinction there is there isn't going to be two separate gods.
But what if they're way more loving and like generous to a Schwab than you and I are, and then we think that means that they're selling Schwab, but they're actually just trying to be more. They're actually just holier than we are. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm getting at here? Like, what if they're just so more like generous?
Well,
like, wait a second, what's wrong with little Schwab?
And you're like,
funny that's it. I knew it. You're a trap. And it's like,
well, what's funny is that does happen. That does happen. That happens with saints where they will respond in ways that we don't understand because we are still so tempted by tribalism and all these things.
Right.
And the holy ones aren't. And so a lot of times, I mean, look, there's a reason why, getting back to another part of the conversation, anyone who's going to actually try to bring free energy, I guarantee you they're going to be killed, because Christ tried to bring understanding and freedom and they killed him. How much more? Right. He says if they hate you, know that they hated me first.
But is that not a tell though? Is that not a tell that what I'm getting at is actually a vocation that the church should be pursuing? And that's why we don't. Oh, let me set this up. The fig leaf of our cowardice is that, I don't want to be a utopian. But the reality is you don't want to die, and you don't want to socially die and be looked like a freak. And you don't want to physically die if you actually do get onto something and then get tortured and put in prison and accused of everything or killed.
I definitely don't disagree with you on that.
Okay.
But I definitely don't disagree. And I think that there's people who, to make it even more applicable, there's lots of artists who are worried about not making art because they think it's going to get them excommunicated, not in the literal sense, but ostracized from their community, because like that's kind of pushing the buttons there. That's pushing the boundaries there. Igor, you know what I mean? Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Right. I think that is a reality. But I think even more than art, you got people who actually will speak truth. I see this all the time where someone speaks truth and people get that guy out of here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you don't even need to go as far as anti-gravity machines or the next, Basquiat. It's as simple as, hey, maybe Donald Trump isn't the savior. Get him out of here.
Yeah.
Hey, maybe Joe Biden is, just kind of like this weird chill of a human being. Get him out of here.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, from a practical pastoral standpoint, would you rather people emulate Nikola Tesla or Donald Trump and Biden?
Oh, obviously Tesla.
And that's kind of what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're not in disagreement there.
Yeah.
The thing is the difference between you and I is
he was Serbian too, right? So
of course, yeah. Oh yeah. Nikola
his
Tesla Airport. That's where I landed when I went to Belgrade.
Yeah.
But the difference between you and I is this: that young man, let's say his name's Simo in my parish, who's like he's onto something. Yes, go to college, Simo, and I'm gonna be right there with his parents, and let's get him some scholarships and all that, whatever. But when the time comes, I'm going to pull Simo aside and say, hey, just so you know, this is what you're headed for. That's the difference between you and I.
What do you mean? I'm going to tell him he's going to get killed too. What do you mean?
We're on the same page then, right? We're on the same page. You're going to get killed for it, Simo, just so you and I know, right? Go for it, Simo.
And you're telling me I should stick to podcasting. I see.
Hey, I'm saying that, I'm watching for you to get that gold ticket. And Qualls to kind of say, oh, my friend, he was a lowly podcaster. Now he has joined us. Very good. Right?
And I'm going to be the bridge. I'll be the bridge between Father Turbo and Schwab to have that conversation.
I remember I had this guy. This is turned into the wildest podcast. I remember I had this guy once. He was telling me he'll never see this. So if he does, if you see this guy, you know who you are. Forgive me. Nobody knows who you are, so don't get all upset. But he was, like, I just got this vision of I feel like God's calling me to minister to the rich people, And he starts talking about. You ever seen the Count of Monte Cristo?
Yeah.
With what's his name? Jim Caviezel.
Yeah.
I love that movie, right?
Yeah,
My family loves that movie. But he was very serious. He's very serious. He's saying to me, he's like, I just, God gave me a vision, just like, like the Count of Monte Cristo when he comes and has this grand ball and comes down the hot air balloon and just brings the gospel. It's like, I think that's what God wants me to be. And it took everything in me to not just laugh in this guy's face. You know what I mean? So, okay, I can see it. I'm all for get the king. You got the people. I get that. But there's a difference between get the king and you got the people versus like, God's calling me to minister to the elites.
so basically, I think I figured it out. So what you're saying is, I think you should, yes, Christians should, in theory, want to be bold and get their engineering wrenches out like Tesla in the name of Jesus.
Yeah.
But I think what you're saying, kind of the litmus test is, if you succeed in creating anti-gravity, that's a sign you sold out to the devil. And if you get killed, well, I told you so, you'd get killed. So it's like, is that what you're getting at? Like, it's a doomed effort, because if you succeed, there's a sign that you've kind of compromised your soul with the establishment for them to have allowed you to succeed. And if you fail, it's because you didn't know what you're doing, you're incompetent, or you were killed. So either way, it's not going to happen. So be a good, holy,
no,
pious person. Right?
There's a point where it's like, yeah, you can go, but there's also a point where it's going to be like, this is what you need to just be prepared for.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah.
Because what we're talking about is, we're not talking about, yeah, go ahead, Jimmy, you can start a gravel company, and Jimmy can start a gravel company and be successful. He may even develop some kind of cool little patent. Like, let's just be like what you're talking about, right?
And I'm talking about technologies to threaten violent oligarchic mafias.
And that's exactly what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
That's why the conversation goes where it's going. Because what I don't think you realize you're doing is you're positing those level of technologies on the same level as Jimmy, who invented a new kind of gravel. That's not what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Like, let's just be really specific.
Yeah.
And I'm being very careful. I'm taking what you're saying
seriously
in the proper context and seriously. Yeah. And that's why I'm saying, like, that's why Tesla isn't just like, oh, random. Tesla did that.
Right.
I mean, and
does that mean he's a kind of martyr?
Hold on. And if you don't like that, not you, David, but like you as in the general kind of like sense, let's talk about the guys who, like, even I don't even want to say it because now I'm going to get a knock on my door. Let's talk about people who try to develop hydrogen power and what keeps happening to them.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just saying, if anyone doesn't know what I'm talking about, just look up that stuff. It's so funny how like, let's say a supermarket gets shot up and it's called white supremacy.
Yeah.
Let's see who ends up getting taken out. I'm just saying,
yeah.
If you want to put on the tinfoil hat, I'm just saying, like, I'm presenting that to you as like, it isn't just as grand as Tesla. It's as low level as someone trying to, develop hydrogen batteries and stuff like that. Like,
yeah.
So,
but does that make my point then that it is picking up the cross to pursue those things that
yes,
challenge?
and all I'm saying is again, for instance, you keep hearing that I'm saying don't do it.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that's a logismy within you. Because I'm saying, yeah, go do it. But here's the thing, right? If it is to the level of what you're saying it is, then right. And if it's not,
but here's the thing, it would be a challenge to the church, because if the church, I guess my mission is, but I know you said don't tell a church what to do at your men's breakfast, but I'm saying if the church was to do its men's breakfasts right, they'd be talking about anti-gravity and they'd be saying, hey, we better make sure we circle the wagons as a collective body and protect the little Teslas of our time and let, shine a light with the spotlight to protect them, because sunlight is the best disinfectant to murder.
I'm not in disagreement with you in the sense that, I had this conversation with a young monk who I think is the future of monasticism in Studenitsa Monastery. We talked about the use of technology, and they're using technology there in that monastery to a profound degree, like high elf magic, like technology. And so the thing is like, yeah, that conversation, that's kind of my point, is those conversations are happening. They're just not happening in the circles that you're privy to.
Yeah.
So the conversations are happening.
You're saying that there's like monasteries that might be having like hoverboards and stuff?
I'm saying that there are monasteries that have very high level technology that they are not scared of.
Wow.
You're just not privy to it. So that was my point with bringing up Pastor James and the rebuke he gave me, which I hold to this day. You be careful, because you don't know.
Well, they better bring that to the public, though. People need to stop these wars, because we need to stop these wars.
Why? I'll flip it on its end for you. Why? What if it's a thing of actually? What if the real message that's being sent is, we, to some degree, a much more honest, what was that guy's name? A much more honest and sophisticated, quote unquote, Benedict option is really what's happening. That actually communities in the know are actually taking what you're saying and have been doing it. And the real plan is to kind of hold out until the scourge passes. Like, you don't know.
You talk about like some kind of Gulch scenario, like Ayn Rand a little bit, like Christian.
I'm just saying, like, you don't know. And so the thing is you got to really, this is the problem, is that there's in the church, in the Orthodox Church, we worship Christ as king, not metaphorically. And so that the ramifications of that are profound. It's part of one of the reasons why I would say to you why Orthodox churches are seeing an explosion. It's not because of, yes, technology is part of it, because the Holy Spirit has moved people in the body of Christ to use technology to get the word out, and it's working. Mm-hmm. Parishes are seeing more people in the last 6 months than they've seen in 6 years. So it's working. But the other thing is, Christ is the head of the church, not the Pope. And sorry for all the, like, you're seeing the fruit of that. And the reality is just because you don't see certain things happening doesn't mean that they aren't happening. And I think that's where, the kind of paywall, I have to kind of put the paywall up, is that there's a reality of things are happening that you don't see. But what I feel comfortable talking about in this context is like all these things that people are seeing, including like the Greys and the Palladians and Donald Trump and all that. I feel very confident in saying that's not what you think it is. So the
Palladians, who's that?
So there's like that's one of those great theories. There's the Greys, the Palladians, like
Is that the Nordic guys?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And then Donald Trump, what is he, a Palladian? Why'd you put Trump in there so casually? What are you doing? I'm not going to let you get away with that. What are you talking about? All right, you can do what you want to do.
I'll say this. I'll say this. There was Tim Pool did a great thing, whatever. It's in a great episode, whatever. Can't believe that people I can't believe people were having conversations about the Antichrist like on that kind of level, meaning like not just the quantity of audience, but to some degree the quality of conversation. But early on in that conversation, they're like, I don't know, and I'm not saying Trump is the Antichrist. That's not what I'm saying. But they're like, well, some things don't line up. Like he's not a blasphemer. And I was like, And you and I have had this conversation, one of our earlier conversations, where you're like, because you were trying to get me to believe that Trump is, kind of doing a cheeky, tongue-in-cheek dance play on his. And I'm like, no, Trump is a blasphemer. The problem is that people don't know what blasphemy is. See, this is all the problem. And that's where people's interpretation of things based on their tradition, which is 100 years old, maybe 200 years old, maybe, is problematic, because that interpretation of blasphemy, right, is so gross, not gross as in like ew, like trash, but gross as in grotesque, right? It's lacking the proper nuance, right? Trump is a blasphemer because when he utters, I've never needed to ask forgiveness for God. This is what you and I were talking about last year, whatever.
Yeah.
That is blasphemy in a spiritual traditional sense. That is a blasphemy.
Yeah.
Right? And so someone who is,
because even if he's joking to play a character, he's
that's
still,
what you don't understand.
but he's still being a role model for people to emulate that pride.
And that's what I was trying to say to you, is that like there's certain things that, and even I think in that conversation we talked about it, there's certain things you don't play at.
Yeah.
Right. And so someone who would play at blasphemy wouldn't blaspheme in a certain way, because that's blasphemy. You see what I'm saying? So he's a blasphemer. And so am I saying the Antichrist? No, I'm not. But what I'm saying is people who were so excited about what he did for the middle class and for this and this and that will get them to overlook certain things. And that whole mechanism is part of the problem with all of this, including your little guys who come up with their slimy little hands on Pascha night and say, hey, can we have a piece of ham? Right? And I'm going to have the little tell and be like, okay, blah, blah, blah. Here's the tell. I'm not going to tell the tell here per se. So here's the
You're
tell.
You're going to hide an egg in one of the baskets, say which one is it?
I'm going to do the egg crack that we do. And did the egg crack or not? You know what I mean? So I'm just saying, just because, right? I'm going to call up Sam Hyde and say, hey, Sam, get over here. Get your Trojan suit on. We need
that guy's going to try to wrestle one of them. That's what he's going to do. He's just going to start doing a shoot match. But I mean, they say they smell like sulfur. I mean, I don't know if that's a tell. I mean, that's what they say in that Brazilian.
What is that? Children's Inn? What's that? Another one my buddy Nikolai keeps telling me to watch and see, but it's like Children's Inn.
Say what?
There's a book. It was a movie. There's also a book. Children's End or something's End.
Sci-fi, right? Ender's Game?
Like basically like they come and they're like, hey, we've been waiting. They're like hanging out in the sky for years, and all the kids start kind of like going into a trance. And at the end, they finally reveal themselves and they're like demons with big bat wings and stuff like that. You see that? Anyways.
Yeah, I mean they had that there's that famous story in, was it South Africa, where there's a little school of all these children. Remember that? And this is in the 90s, and these little entities came out. And they had like, one of them had like dreadlocks or something and a little black spacesuit. And they said that there's like 60 of these little school children in the 90s reported these things, talking to them and telling them that the earth was being harmed by humans and that things were getting ugly and y'all need to be good. And they all drew the same image, same eyes, same little spacesuit. And there was like a whole gaggle, a whole schoolyard of kids in South Africa, a little ship. And the little guy just moved up off of the little ship, And then there's another one in Brazil where I mean, and there's always, you can poke holes in these things. So it may be just, humans doing human stuff, superstitious, delusions, collective delusions, maybe.
You
But
said South Africa?
yeah.
With that, you stinking prongs. What are you prongs doing?
But there's another one in Brazil where they find a little guy. He's got oily black, like kind of a reddish brown skin, and he smells like sulfur. And then there's a couple of these Brazilian military officers die after they hold the little fella. So I just don't want Christians to be caught up in scapegoating another little other. Lord knows that Christians have swept up in the mob too many times, in really horrific situations. And I don't want our churches to be like, hey, that's a demon. And it's like, nah, man, I was just here to try to, just because I have sulfuric smell doesn't mean I'm from hell, just don't judge a book by its cover, man. I mean, I smell like ammonia doesn't mean,
Yeah, I mean, what's funny is this trope you're promoting is it's getting into the kind of general psyche. There's another show that I saw recently. I didn't catch it, but I saw a clip of it, and there's some priest, whatever, some church, and he's like, "Don't be afraid, don't be afraid." And this demon and clerics from Western clericals, he stands up, and everyone's like freaking out. And then like he opens up his wings, and they're like, "Oh my God, he looks kind of like a Freddy Krueger kind of guy."
Yeah, yeah.
And so that's a recent. I don't know what show that was. I'm sure someone on your thing will clickety clack and say it was the show, but like, yeah, what you're saying is a trope that's getting out there. So it's interesting. You're keyed into that frequency where it's just like, hey, Christians, don't be such bigots. Remember the witch trials. If they come with bat wings and oily skin and they have upside down crosses and pentagrams, doesn't mean they're the devil. You know what I mean? It just means that this is the symbols that they used on their planet. They come, and if they say that Jesus isn't God, that's just the way that they've understood it. And so I can understand that.
Sounds like you're leaning to more of a right wing response. We're just going to assume it's a witch and we're burning it.
Well, I will say this to you. There is something to say for and this is kind of, I think, part of the fallout, right, from the woke religion of like, what's wrong with this transsexual, transvestite, drag queen reading a book talking about oral copulation to my kid? What's wrong with that? Yeah. I think you're just being, you know what I mean? Like, you're just being a fundamentalist who's just ready to burn the witches.
Right, yeah.
So enough Christians they've heard that enough to where they're like, yeah, you know what? I guess that is kind of true.
Yeah.
So yeah, mission accomplished.
Yeah. Well,
back to our other conversation where we're talking about the very fundamentals of like, maybe it isn't a boy. It's like maybe it is the thing.
Well, this is getting back to what we're talking about. What is real? What is reality? And what kind of reality are we looking at? Because I do think this narrative, they haven't put it in the New York Times and Tucker Carlson like they've been doing in 60 Minutes for no reason. And I'm just trying to get ahead of the narrative and analyze it as soberly as possible, meaning exploring every possible scenario painstakingly, as we've done today. I don't think anybody's really, outside of the ufology community, I don't think anybody in the more broader conversation has nitpicked the hairs of the anthropology of the biblical anthropology of aliens like we've done.
And I agree. And this is why I would get to, and I guess I would just end on this.
Yeah.
When I was back when I was in my previous career, I had a client that was, a legit 3-letter agency employee. And one of the questions I asked was like, how can you tell? Like, do they have classes on like learning, like, let's say counterfeit or whatever? He said, what's funny is the way that we learn counterfeit, what he told me? How do they learn counterfeit?
Oh.
You study the real thing so well that when you see the counterfeit, it's just you tell. And that really, I was like, wow, that preached for me for a long time. So I'm still preaching it, right? So this is what I'm trying to say is essentially is, our little 3-letter agency in regards of like the church, right? we're the emphasis isn't on all, because we could spend another 2.5 hours talking about infinitum, all the minute ways this could play out. When we're not worried about that, what we're trying to do is we know the original so well. We know the archetype so well. And that's the thing, is that's what people don't do. That's what's missing from all the conversations, all the narratives, is no one ever wants to say, well, what's the archetype? Because that's where we get back into the postmodernist mess of like, well, what is the archetype?
Yeah.
Right? So we just say, you know what, go ahead and question the archetype. Go ahead and question what a man is, what a woman is,
Yeah.
question what Baphomet is. Go ahead and question all that.
Yeah.
We're gonna just come over here and we're gonna know the archetype.
Right.
That's all.
Yeah. I appreciate your time. And I think I'm going to say this. Whatever this stuff is, there's a difference between the ugliness of the Elephant Man, Joseph Merrick, and the ugliness of a raving Satanist.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that, let's be clear. There's Christians are always going to, we're not going to treat Elephant Man differently if he came to our church.
No.
We're not treating him differently when he drinks from the cup, right? We're not treating him differently when he wants to break bread. Elephant Man comes in many shapes and sizes, including a little brown alien. What's that?
We've never been talking about that.
Yeah.
That's never in question. My church is filled with elephant men.
That's what I'm just saying, is that it also applies. I'm just loading that back into this anthropological speculation about whatever those things are, that
because in that sense I'm the elephant man.
Yeah.
I mean, that's maybe one of the reasons why I'm the interesting guest, quote unquote, because I'm the elephant man priest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? I'm the elephant man.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the one covered in tattoos and tall and big and black and all that stuff.
Just because they smell like sulfur doesn't mean they're from hell, but if they act demonic, that's a sign they are, right? So we'll leave it there. By the fruits you shall know them, right? We'll leave it there.
Yeah. Because you had a lot of egg salad for lunch. You don't know.
I appreciate your time, sir, and it's a great reflection and a preview of the next year. So thank you for doing this with me.
Thank you. It was fun.
Take care. And you can email us hello@aneighborschoice.com and check out Father Turbo on the Royal Path podcast. Thank you.